Okay, well, everybody, welcome to our webinar today. So glad to have you with us. And we are going to be talking about getting started with Family Search web indexing. This is the exciting new program that replaces the old desktop program if you had been using that. This webinar will be appropriate for people who both have used the desktop program and those who haven't. If you're just new to indexing, this webinar will still be helpful to you. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be covering today. First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit, just very briefly, about why indexing matters. Because I've been surprised as I've talked with people who have indexed that sometimes they don't realize the value of what they're doing and they don't realize where their work ends up. So we'll talk about that briefly. And then for those of you who have used the desktop indexing program, we'll talk about what's different between the old desktop program and the new web indexing application. Then we'll talk about how to get started with web indexing, and followed by how to index your first batch. We'll talk about indexing in another language. There's a pretty great need for this. And so if you have any familiarity with another language, that's something that you might want to consider. Finally, we'll talk about what everybody wants to know, how to get help when you need it. So let's go ahead and dive in. Why does indexing matter? Well, indexing turns this somewhat difficult to read document into this. So you can see there's a huge difference between those two. The result of indexing is information that is easy to read and it's organized, and most importantly, it's searchable. It makes it a lot easier to find. So when you index records, where do they end up? When you go to Family Search Historical Records and search, if you find something, you can thank an indexer. All the records that you index end up on the historical records site to be freely searchable for anybody who's interested in doing their family history. And then also, if you've ever taken advantage of a record hint on the person page in Family Tree, those are also indexed records. So you can see that indexing is so valuable in making historical records available to people who are trying to trace their family history. What's different about web indexing compared to the old desktop program? Well, the old desktop program is about 11 years old this year. It started in 2006. So as you can imagine, and in the information age with technology, 10 years is a lifetime, 11 years. And so a lot of things have changed and improved between the old program and the new one. The old one was wonderful for the time that it lasted, and now we're ready to move to the next generation of indexing. The old program had to be downloaded and installed on your computer or laptop. Mobile devices were not even a part of the picture at that point. Whereas web indexing can be accessed via the web and there's nothing to download or install. It's a little bit hard to do web indexing on a small screen, but if you have a tablet, a large size tablet, you can even do web indexing on that type of mobile device. And desktop indexing, similarly, the updates had to be installed manually. And if you ever got one of those jar errors when you were trying to install, you know how frustrating that can be, and it can put you out of commission for a while. Well, the great thing about web indexing is that there's nothing to install for even updates. So anytime an update is made, it's just made on Family Search's end, and we as users don't even have to worry about it. Makes things a lot simpler. The old desktop program had a more complex interface, so there were a little bit of some more options that were available, and it was an old style interface. The complexity and the simplicity kind of cut two ways. I've talked to users that really loved the old interface even though it was more complex, and so when they've moved to web indexing, they've kind of missed what they were used to and missed some of the features that were available that aren't yet available in web indexing. But to that point, even though desktop indexing has more features at present, web indexing is fast gaining ground. And those features that we used to love about desktop indexing, if they're not in web indexing, they probably will be soon. So it's worth making a comment here that Family Search, in my experience, is so open to the feedback of their users. They have just been so responsive and willing to listen. And so if you have a favorite feature from the desktop indexing program that isn't on the web indexing application, I would click the feedback button on pretty much any Family Search page and send that feedback to Family Search. Let them know what you're missing and that let them know that something is important to you. And if enough users do that, they'll make that more of a priority. Or I should say there's a good chance. I can't guarantee what they'll do, of course. But in my experience, if they know that a lot of users want a particular feature, it tends to get higher priority. Last of all, desktop indexing could be done offline, so you didn't have to have an internet connection. That is not the case right now with web indexing. You do have to have an internet connection. You can't do it offline yet, although I did hear in a meeting that that was being considered for the future. So you may see that functionality in a future update to web indexing. Okay, if you are interested in doing web indexing, how do you get started? It's actually really, really simple. You, at the top of pretty much any Family Search page, just hover over the word indexing and then choose web indexing. Now, something interesting will happen, at least it did when I first signed up a few months back, and that is that you're going to get an email, and it's going to tell you, thank you for signing up. The problem was when I visited the site, I didn't think I'd signed up for anything, so I was a little confused by this email. I thought it might even be spam at first since I hadn't signed up, in the way that you traditionally think of signing up for something. I didn't complete a form or anything like that. But apparently, all you need to do is visit that page for the first time, and then you get this helpful email. So don't be put off by the fact that it says that you signed up for something if you think that you really didn't, like I thought that I really didn't. One good thing about this email is there's a Getting Started section that has links that you can if you might want to save this email so you have access to those links, and they will direct you to the web indexing page and also to a page with helpful information. And we'll actually be talking about that a little bit later. So when you choose web indexing from that menu, you'll get that email. That was kind of a little detour, but you'll also be taken directly to this screen. On this screen, you will notice that the first batch there, or the only batch at first, is the guided tour. To my knowledge, this type of thing was not available in the old desktop program, and I have to tell you, I love this. When I took this tour, I thought it was so helpful, and my 9-year-old niece took it as well, and she did great on it. Well, we know kids are pretty tech savvy, but this tour is simple enough that even for a person who might consider themselves technologically challenged, they'll be able to do this tour. So if you're helping people that just say, oh, I don't think I can do this, or I don't, I'm not sure I have the confidence to do this, have them take the guided tour, and I am sure that that will increase their confidence, and it will give them a good overview of how to do indexing. So let's take a look at the guided tour just briefly. You start it by clicking Open Batch, and you get this little introductory screen. And so you can read their little introduction here. An important thing is it points out that the information you enter won't be saved. And so that can be encouraging to people to know that if they make a mistake, it's not going to have any impact. They can practice this as much as they want, and mistakes don't matter. So when they're ready to start, they go ahead and click Start Tour, and you will see a screen similar to this. One of the most important things that you can do whenever you open any batch is to check out the project instructions. These will tell you how to be successful in indexing whatever you're doing. So I would strongly recommend taking the 30 seconds or 1 or 2 minutes that it takes to read those project instructions. You'll be glad that you did. The project instruction box can be resized by dragging this little handle that you see. So you can either make the box bigger or smaller, depending on how the size might help you read it. So if you need the box to be bigger to show more of the text, then it's easy to do that by dragging the handle. When you don't want the project instructions on the screen anymore, you just go ahead and click this X to close them. Both items, both the instructions and the actual image, can be dragged on to reposition them on the screen. So if you've ever used something like Google Maps, it's the same principle. You just click, hold, and drag to wherever you want that thing to be on the screen. The tour provides step-by-step guidance for every field that you have to index. And you'll notice that right now this little kind of arrow thing is pointing to this first field. And as you display more fields, as you work through the tour, this little box moves to the next field and displays information that is relevant specifically to that field. So really you can't go wrong with doing the guided tour, and it's just a great way to get used to how to work in the new program. When you get to the end of the guided tour, there's going to be a button that says Submit Batch, and you just submit it, and then you're done. The guided tour, you notice, remember that it shows up when you're first new to indexing. Once you submit the tour, it goes away from the My Batches section. It's removed. It also goes away if somebody chooses not to take the tour and they start an active batch, then the tour also disappears. The logic to that seems to be that if you are working on another batch, you probably don't need the guided tour. Or if you've completed 5 batches, then the tour also goes away. But what if you have maybe tried a couple batches and you think, oh, I'd really like to go back and take the guided tour? How do you get it back? Well, it's really easy. You just go to the secondary menu here and choose Overview, and that'll be on pretty much any indexing page. So just click Overview, and then you'll have to scroll down a bit, but you'll see this line here for trying a guided tour, and just click Try It Out, and you'll get back to the guided tour. So just go to Overview and scroll to Try a Guided Tour, and you can bring it up again. Okay, now that we've gotten familiar with how to get started, whoops, that went a little bit too fast. There we go. Now that we're familiar with how to get started with web indexing, let's talk about how to index your first batch. And in order to index a batch, it's important to understand 3 key terms. First of all, what exactly is a batch? Well, in web indexing, and actually in the old program too, a batch is a set of images to be indexed. What is an image? An image is one digital page. And then finally, an entry represents an individual event on a page. Now, if you're like me, visuals are better, and so let's look at an actual page that illustrates these definitions that we've just talked about. So here I am on a parish register that's able to be indexed, and I've brought up this image. So this is one digital page, and you notice that in the original book, there actually would have been 2 pages here. But when we're working online, we actually don't pay attention to how things were done in the paper world. But if it's one picture on the screen, then it's considered one digital page, one image. An entry on this page is an individual event. So this is a list of baptisms that took place in this parish in England, and there are 16 of them, 8 on each paper page and 16 on the entire digital page. So every one of these entries is one event. It's one baptism. So when you are ready to choose a regular batch, you click Find Batches on that main screen. There's 2 ways to find a batch that you would be interested in doing, either scrolling through the batches that are displayed or doing a search. Let's look at each way of finding a batch. If you just want to scroll, you just use the scroll bars here on the right-hand side of the list of available projects to be indexed. When you're ready, you just click the word index and it will open on your screen. But what if you want to look for something specific? For instance, you want only beginning batches and you want them maybe only from a specific country. Well, in that case, you'll get better results by using the search panel over here on the left-hand side. So as an example, I wanted a beginning batch, and so I clicked beginning under difficulty level. And then for my location, I actually wanted England. But guess what? When I typed England, it didn't find a match. And so I discovered that for some jurisdictions, they belong to part of a larger group. And England is an example of that. So England belongs to the United Kingdom along with Wales and Scotland. And one of the Irelands, I always forget which one it is, but those four comprise the United Kingdom. And so I couldn't enter England and have it work. I had to go up a level to the United Kingdom. And I wanted to point that out. That may be true of other countries as well. So if you ever start typing a country and you don't get a match in the location, the match will show up in a blue box below the field. So if you don't get a match, try going up a level to a higher geographical jurisdiction. By the way, if you have questions about any of these things, please do go ahead and enter those in the interface there, and we will be sure to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so when you're ready, when you found a batch that looks good to you, go ahead and click Index, and that will open the batch. And then once again, let me put in a plug for the project instructions. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this acronym. Probably if you have a teenager at home, you are. This stands for Too Long Didn't Read. And I have friends at work that have been known to respond to a lengthy email with that, just saying, too long, didn't read. And I think this is kind of a indication of the culture that we live in these days. We are kind of centered on instant gratification, short tweets, that kind of thing. And so sometimes we feel like we either don't have the patience or don't have the time to read something that is more than a few lines. The thing is, the information in the project instructions is well worth the small amount of time that it takes to read. So if you have this feeling, or if you run into anybody who has this feeling, I would just encourage them, don't fall prey to TLDR in terms of the project instructions. You will always be glad that you read them and got the information that you needed to be successful in indexing the batch. If you shut down the project instructions and you decide that you need to see them again, there's two ways that you can get them back on the screen. One is to click the project instructions here, and if more fields are showing, you might have to scroll down to see this link, or another really simple way to do it is to just click this icon on the toolbar, and that will also open the project instructions back up. If you need to resize the image, you can go ahead and use the plus and the minus here. And you notice here, this image is definitely too small to read. So I would want to use the plus to make that larger. And I probably would want to close down my project instructions because right now they're covering up part of the image that I need to index. So this gives you control over the size of the image that you're indexing. Drop-down menus provide common options, and we're not going to cover all the options in our webinar today. They're pretty self-explanatory, and so just when you're in the indexing program, you can go ahead and click on the drop-down and just look at the options that are available there. Help is a great one, and if you have questions about the others, there's a good chance that you'll find an answer in Help. The toolbar has a great feature in that if you hover over any one of these icons when you're actually in the live program, you'll see a little pop-up that describes what each item does. Now, if there are more than one images in a batch, you're going to see this little navigation aid at the bottom, which is referred to as a film strip. Kind of looks like one, doesn't it? The image that you're currently on is going to have a colored box around it, and you can just click on any image to navigate to that image. So now that we've looked a little bit looked at the interface of the web indexing program, let's walk through how to actually do the indexing. So the first step is to determine if the index should be imaged. And you might be saying to yourself, well, gosh, how do I tell that? Or, why would they include an image that doesn't need to be indexed? The answer to that is generally the images do need to be indexed, and Family Search tries not to put in images that don't need indexing, but occasionally one is going to slip through. So an example of an image that doesn't need indexing is one that's blank. And so if something blank comes up on the screen, you can say, no, this image should not be indexed. Or another example, if you've worked in census records, you might be familiar with that little page at the beginning of most censuses that just lists what the enumerator was doing, what streets he or she was covering. And there's no genealogically valuable information on that page to be indexed. So if you get a page like that that is, the census taker's notes or the clergyman's notes, or it's blank or whatever, then you would say that the image doesn't need to be indexed. But most of the time, you'll answer that yes, that it does need to be indexed. When you say that the images need to be indexed, then you're going to get the entry form that allows you to do the actual indexing. And the first item is almost always going to be the entry type. So here we're dealing with parish registers that only have 3 entry types: christenings or baptisms, marriages, and burials. The types vary depending on the record, but when you click this drop down, you will see the available types for whatever batch you're working on, and then you just choose the appropriate type. And for instance, in this one, this is a little hard to see because it's small, but this says baptism. So normally the type of record that you're indexing will be indicated on the record itself. This I love. You will notice that when you are on a field, a little purple circle with a question mark shows up. If you click that icon, you get a pop-out that gives you specific information about just that field. So it's very quick and easy to read, and it's exactly relevant to what you're working on. So if you ever get stuck on a field, just click that icon, the purple question mark icon, and chances are that you'll get exactly the information that you need. So when the way that you complete your first entry is that you just keep entering all the fields as they show up on your screen. So after you choose the type, at least for a christening record, all the rest of the fields will show up on the screen. And I think that's probably pretty consistent for any type of record that you're indexing. So you just go ahead and type the information straight off the image into the fields over here on the left-hand side. If you get to the bottom of the form and there is another entry or event, then you click Create Entry of whatever number, and then it clears these fields and sets them up for the next entry. Now here's a shortcut that you might find helpful. In most fields, you can press either Control D if you're on a PC or laptop, or you can press Command D if you use a Mac. And what that does is it duplicates the contents of the same field from the previous entry. So as an example, this christening image, the entries are all from 1946. So you're never going to get different years on a record like this unless it happened to cover December and January. And this one didn't. It was all 1946. So every time that I get to this christening year, I want it to be 1946. Well, every time I get to this field, I can just press Control D, and it remembers what I typed the previous time and just auto-completes it for me. And that works on all of the fields when in the data entry screen. You can also use this icon. If you're not much of a keyboard person, then this icon will also duplicate the contents of the same field in the previous entry. When you finish indexing all entries on an image and there is another image, you go ahead and click Next Image. And the way you can tell is that you'll see this film strip, and if the box is not on the last image, then that means that there are more images that need to be indexed. So you would click Next Image. When you get to the end, when you've indexed all the events or all the entries on the image, it's a good idea to do your own review. Now, somebody else is going to go ahead and review those, but I figure why not do a review and catch any mistakes that I might have made to make it easier for the person who does the review later on. The way that you would do that is you can click this back button here to go back to the first entry, or you can actually put the number 1 in this field right here and then go ahead and hit enter, and it will pop you back to the first entry. So when I do that, I found that it's really helpful to say a prayer and ask for Heavenly Father's help to catch any mistakes that I might have made. And I'll tell you, I just about always catch at least one mistake and sometimes more. And so that prayer really does seem to help. And so what I'll do is I'll just go through every entry and I'll compare what I've typed on the screen to the information on the image just to double check it and see if I might have overlooked something or made a mistake. When I get to the end, then I click Submit Batch, and the quality check runs automatically. Now, the quality check, what it mainly catches is empty fields in my experience. So here's an example. If I neglected to put in the christening day, it's going to give me an error message and say that this field is a required field. Well, there's two scenarios on this actually. The first scenario is that maybe the clergyman forgot to record the information. And if that's the case, then I can't put a christening date in. So I would click Accept to let the web indexing program know that it was correct that I didn't put information in this field. The other scenario is that I just simply forgot to type that information. Oops, sorry about that. I forgot I had a call out there. So yeah, you click Accept if the field is accurate as it is. But if it's not and that you need to make corrections, then you just go ahead and make the corrections in that field. So here I've put in the right date, and then notice that the error information or error message automatically disappears, and it tells me, hey, there's no more issues. So would you like to submit your work now? And if I feel comfortable that I've caught all the issues and I've done my careful review, then I go ahead and click Submit Batch. And I get a celebration screen, which is really cool. I've talked to users, they love this. It makes confetti fall down on the page. So you can't see it on this screen because this is not animated, but when you actually finish a batch, you'll see this confetti just floating down the screen. And you also have the opportunity to start a new indexing batch if you're interested in doing that, although you don't have to. So if you're not interested at this time or it's not a good time, you just click the X to close and you're done with that batch. Okay, let's talk about indexing in another language. I remember seeing a report on church membership, and I believe it was as of the beginning of this century, so around the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken. And it said that as of that time, we had more non-English speaking members of the church than English speaking members of the church. That is so exciting because it means that the gospel is going abroad to all the nations of the earth. But look at the percentage of records that aren't indexed in English. Only 8%. So that means that 50% of our, or over 50% of our members whose native language is not English and who probably don't have a lot of English ancestors, they only have this small proportion of records that they can use to find their loved ones and have temple work done. So you can see there's a pretty huge inequity there. And that's why Family Search has put the call out to all of us as indexers that there is an urgent need for us to help with language indexing. Obviously, you can help if you're fluent in another language. For instance, you served a mission in Spain or the Netherlands or wherever, or maybe you lived abroad. So if you have that fluency, that's just a slam dunk. You're totally needed to help. But you know what? Even if you aren't a native speaker or a fluent speaker of a language, even if you have basic familiarity with another language, such as you took French in high school like I did, you've got the information that you need. You've got enough knowledge to help with language indexing. So I would encourage all of us who are listening to uh, consider this, prayerfully consider this, and see if you might be able to make a contribution to doing language indexing. And there's some great help available for you to do language indexing. If you go to pretty much any indexing page, you'll see this little submenu here, and one of the options is Help Resources. When you click Help Resources, you will see this, I don't even know what to call this, a bar, I guess, this bar that you can click, and it has Help Resources for indexers. Then you will see all these options show up on the screen, and one of them is Language and Handwriting Helps. So when you click that, you get taken to this page, and I'm going to show you my favorite resource first. My favorite resource is this unlikely named Latin genealogical word list. I believe they meant Latin in the sense that it uses Latin characters, but it isn't just Latin. It's many different languages. So when you click on this link, it's actually a little bit convoluted to get to the word list page. What you will get taken to when you click on that link is this Wiki article, which is not a list of the word lists. But if you click this hyperlink right here, just under the title, then you get taken to the list of word lists. So this has when you click on any of these links, you will get taken to a page. Like if I clicked on Afrikaans, I would get taken to a page that gives me a list of Afrikaans terms that are likely to appear on an Afrikaans record, and they give you the English equivalents. So this is a fantastic resource for when you're indexing. If you come across a word in a record that you don't recognize or don't understand, then just come here to the word list and chances are you're going to find the answer to your question. This is seriously one of my favorite language help resources. If you don't want to go back to that other resources page, you can actually go to the Family Search Wiki and just search for genealogical word lists, and it takes you to that list. Or if you want the URL, here it is. So familysearch.org, wiki, EN for English, and then just genealogical, and those are actually underscores between the words, so you'd want to type genealogical underscore word underscore lists. It's actually just easier to search, right? Okay, back to the language resources page. There's another great resource besides those word lists, and that is that at the top you can choose a language. So up here I chose French because I was working on French records, and then all the information that appears below has to do with France. And there's a number, or with French indexing, I should say, because other countries speak French too, like French Canada. But once you select a language there, you will get different resources that have to do with that language. So if you choose to do language indexing, you won't be left alone. You'll have lots of great resources that will be able to help you. Speaking of help, what are some of the key ways that you can get help when you're indexing? Well, one of the big questions that people have when they're indexing, especially with old records, is what on earth is that character? I have no idea what that is. Old handwriting can be a challenge, but you know what? Just like anything else, the more we learn about it, the easier it gets. And these handwriting examples are a great way to learn. So when you're in the indexing program, you just click this pen with the little squiggle and it brings up these handwriting examples. So you've got the modern character here at the top, and then you've got the different varieties of how that letter was written in old style script. You can also get more handwriting help by going back to that Help Resources page and clicking Indexer, and then clicking again Language and Handwriting Helps. This is probably looking familiar now. And so if you look under Handwriting Helps, then you have a whole bunch of resources, and there's even a little game, a handwriting game, that didn't fit on this screenshot, but if you scroll down on this page, you'll see it. So if you enjoy games, you might enjoy that one. Then other ways to get help. Once again, always check the project instructions that pop up when you first open the batch. A consultant friend of mine mentioned that in about, I think she said it was about 98% of the time. She was a stake lead consultant, as I recall, over indexing. And she said like 98% of the time when people asked her questions, the answer was in the project instructions. So she would just start saying, oh, that's a great question. Let's check the instructions, as a way of helping people realize how valuable those are. So if you have a question, definitely check out the project instructions first. Or if it's specific to the field, again, remember that you can click the circle with the purple circle with the question mark in it, and you'll get the help specifically for that field. Also, the help drop-down has a lot of great options for finding help with different things. If you're a keyboard person, for example, click on the keyboard shortcuts. That will give you some great ways to save time. The help resources goes back to that page that we were just on. Let me make a quick comment about sharing batches. You can, under batch here, there's an option to share a batch. And if you get stuck on an image and you just are beating your head against a wall trying to read some of that old handwriting, you can actually indicate that you want to share a batch, and then Family Search gives you a number of that shared batch, and you can give that number to somebody else. And so then they would come here, they'd say open shared batch, and they would input that number that you gave them, and they would be able to look at the batch too. So that is a great way to get help if you're stumped on an image, because sometimes just another set of eyes can really be helpful. Another way to get help is to contact your ward Temple and Family History consultant. And Family Search has made it so easy for you to find your ward consultants. You just go to any FamilySearch.org page and sign in. And then up at the top, you've got this Get Help option that I'm sure most of us are familiar with. When you click that, it drops down to this menu, and one of the options is Contact Us. And when you do that, your local consultants are listed on the page. Here is another fantastic option for getting familiar with web indexing. These videos were created by a Family Search employee named Jason Pearson, and they're on YouTube, as you probably noticed. So you just go to YouTube, and if you search for Family Search, one word, web indexing Jason Pearson, spelled this way, Pierson, then you will come up with 5 videos that will give you some great instruction on using the web indexing program. Highly recommend those. And we spoke again about, or we spoke before, excuse me, about the help resources page. We kind of focused on language and handwriting, but let's look at the other options that are there. A little word of caution here. Last time I visited this Get Started, it was only about desktop indexing, but if it hasn't already been updated, I would expect that it would be soon. So just if you do get something about web indexing, just check back later, or excuse me, about desktop indexing, then just know that you can check back later, and sometime in the future it will be updated. The help articles takes you to the knowledge base. So you can search, if you search for web indexing in the knowledge base, then you will find articles that are specifically on that, about that topic. Basic guidelines are really helpful. The FAQs are really helpful. So this page is a good resource for finding answers to your questions. Another great resource for getting help is the community, the indexing community. 2 of my favorites are Yammer. So if you go to yammer.com Family Search Groups, actually I take that back. You do need to be invited to Yammer. It's if you haven't used Yammer before, it's basically Facebook for business. And so Family Search started a Yammer community, but it operates very much the same way as Facebook in that you can have groups, you can post messages, you can ask questions and so forth. So if you are interested in being invited to Yammer, send me an email and I can invite you to that. You have to be invited by somebody who's already a member, and my email address appears at the end of this presentation. But I love Yammer. It's been just a fantastic way to network with other indexers. Facebook also has a number of different groups. Here are two of the groups that I found the most helpful. One is just called Family Search Indexing. So if you search for that on Facebook, you'll get it. And the other is Share Batch Indexing. So this is a place where you can post a request for somebody to look at a batch that you've shared, and you can give people the number, and then they can look at it and give you help right there in the Facebook group. So, in conclusion, I love this quote that appeared in a Family Search blog article by Michael Judson. He said, like seeds planted in good soil, your indexing efforts are multiplying, and the internet is being flooded with freely searchable records as a result. Thank you for being one who's making such a huge difference to those who are looking to make those amazing connections to their past. So I would echo thank you to those of you who have indexed in the past and to those of you who are going to index in the future. This is just an amazing way to help move the work of family history forward. And that concludes our webinar for today. So thank you so much for your time.
We haven't
And
had any
Braden, do we
questions
have any
submitted yet. If there
questions?
are any questions, please submit those into the questions box now, and we'll get those answered for you. But at the moment, there aren't any more questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank everybody for joining us today. This webinar has been recorded, and we will post it onto our YouTube channel as well as um, post the links to our website. You can follow us on our social media sites to make sure you stay updated on what's going on here at the BYU Family History Library. We thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again on Thursday. Have a great day.